The Saxons were a group of Germanic tribes first mentioned as living near the North Sea coast of what is now Germany, in late Roman times. They were soon mentioned as raiding and settling in many North Sea areas, as well as pushing south inland towards the Franks. Significant numbers settled in large parts of Great Britain in the early Middle Ages and formed part of the merged group of Anglo-Saxons who eventually organized the first United Kingdom of England. Many Saxons, however, remained in Germania, where they resisted the expanding Frankish Empire through the leadership of the semi-legendary Saxon hero, Widukind. The Saxons' earliest area of settlement is believed to have been northern Albania, an area approximately that of modern Holstein. This general area also included the probable homeland of the Angles-Saxons, along with the Angles and other continental Germanic tribes, participated in the Anglo-Saxon settlement of Britain during and after the 5th century. The British Celtic inhabitants of the Isles tended to refer to all these groups collectively as Saxons. It is unknown how many Saxons migrated from the continent to Britain, though estimates for the total number of Anglo-Saxon settlers are around 200,000. During the Middle Ages, because of international Hanseatic trading routes and contingent migration, Saxons mixed with and had strong influences upon the languages and cultures of the Baltic peoples, Finnic peoples, and Palabian Slavs and Pomeranians, both West Slavic peoples, as well as influencing the North Germanic languages. Etymology. The Saxons may have derived the name from seax, a kind of knife for which they were known. The seax has a lasting symbolic impact in the English counties of Essex and Middlesex, both of which feature 3 shaxes in the ceremonial emblem. The names, along with those of Sussex and Wessex, contain a remnant of the word Saxon. The Elizabethan-era play Edmund Ironside suggests the Saxon name derives from the Latin saxa. The names discover what the natures are, more hard than stones, and yet not stones indeed. Saxon as a demonym. Celtic languages. In the Celtic languages, the words designating English nationality derive from the Latin word Saxones. The most prominent example, a loanword in English, is the Scottish Gaelic Sasnic, often used disparagingly in Scottish English, Scots. It derives from the Scottish Gaelic Sasunach, meaning, originally, Saxon, from the Latin Saxones. Scots are Scottish English speakers in the 21st century usually use it in jest, as a term of abuse. The Oxford English Dictionary gives 1771 as the date of the earliest written use of the word in English. Sasanic, the Irish word for an Englishman, has the same derivation, as do the words used in Welsh to describe the English people and the language and things English in general. Saesneg and Saesneg. Cornish terms the English Sausneg, from the same derivation. In the 16th century, Cornish speakers used the phrase mea navidnek as a Sausneg to feign ignorance of the English language. England, in Scottish Gaelic, is Sasayan. Other examples include the Welsh Saesneg, Irish Sasana, Breton Saoz, and Cornish Sosan, Sosneg, and Pausas for land of Saxons. Romance languages. The label Saxons was also applied to German settlers who migrated during the 13th century to southeastern Transylvania. From Transylvania, some Saxons migrated to the neighboring Moldavia, as the name of the town, Shashkut, shows. Saskut is located in the part of Moldavia that is today part of Romania. During Georg Friedrich Handel's visit to Italy, much was made of his being from Saxony. In particular, the Venetians greeted the 1709 performance of his opera Agrippina with the cry Viva il caro Sassone, cheers for the beloved Saxon. Non-Indo-European languages. The Finns and Estonians have changed the usage of the term Saxony over the centuries to denote now the whole country of Germany and the Germans. The Finnish word saxetsis reflects the name of the Old Saxon single-edged sword seax, from which Saxon is supposedly derived. In Estonian, sax means a nobleman or, colloquially, a wealthy or powerful person. As a result of the Northern Crusades in the Middle Ages, Estonia's upper class had been mostly of German origin until well into the 20th century. Related surnames. The word also survives as the surnames of Sast, Sasha and Sax. The Dutch female first name, Saskia, originally meant a Saxon woman. Saxony as a toponym. Following the downfall of Henry the Lion, and the subsequent splitting of the Saxon tribal duchy into several territories, the name of the Saxon duchy was transferred to the lands of the Ascanian family. This led to the differentiation between Lower Saxony, lands settled by the Saxon tribe, and Upper Saxony, the lands belonging to the House of Wettin. Gradually, a different region became known as Saxony, ultimately usurping the name's original meaning. The area formerly known as Upper Saxony now lies in central Germany. History. Early history. Ptolemy's Geographia, written in the 2nd century, is sometimes considered to contain the first mentioning of the Saxons. Some copies of this text mention a tribe called Saxonies in the area to the north of the Lower Elbe. However, other versions refer to the same tribe as Axones. This may be a misspelling of the tribe that Tacitus in his Germania called Avions. According to this theory, Saxonies was the result of later scribes trying to correct a name that meant nothing to them. On the other hand, Schutt, in his analysis of such problems in Ptolemy's maps of northern Europe, believed that Saxonies is correct. He notes that the loss of first letters occurs in numerous places in various copies of Ptolemy's work, and also that the manuscripts without Saxonies are generally inferior overall. Schutt also remarks that there was a medieval tradition of calling this area Old Saxony. In contrast, other scholars note that sources such as Bede, who mentioned Old Saxony, might be interpreted as saying it was near the Rhine, somewhere to the north of the River Lippe, and were in any case not personally familiar with the area. In AD 441–42, Saxons are mentioned for the first time as inhabitants of Britain, when an unknown Gaulish historian wrote, "The British provinces have been reduced to Saxon rule." The first undisputed mention of the Saxon name in its modern form is from AD 356, when Julian, later the Roman emperor, mentioned them in a speech as allies of Magnentius, a rival emperor in Gaul. Zosimus also mentions a specific tribe of Saxons, called the Coardoi, which have been interpreted as the Chauci. They entered the Rhineland and displaced the recently settled Salian Franks from Batavia, whereupon some of the Salians began to move into the Belgian territory of Toxandria, supported by Julian. In order to defend against Saxon raiders, the Romans created a military district called the Litis Saxonicum on both sides of the English Channel. Saxons as inhabitants of present-day northern Germany are first mentioned in 555, when the Frankish king Theodbald died, and the Saxons used the opportunity for an uprising. The uprising was suppressed by Clothar I, Theodbald's successor. Some of the Frankish successors fought against the Saxons, others were allied with them. Clothar II won a decisive victory against the Saxons. The Thuringians frequently appeared as allies of the Saxons. Continental Saxons. Saxony. The continental Saxons living in what was known as Old Saxony appear to have become consolidated by the end of the 8th century. After subjugation by the Emperor Charlemagne, a political entity called the Duchy of Saxony appeared. The Saxons long resisted becoming Christians and being incorporated into the orbit of the Frankish kingdom. In 776 the Saxons Saxons promised to convert to Christianity and vow loyalty to the king, but once Charlemagne went to Spain, they staged further attacks in 778. This was an often repeated pattern when Charlemagne was distracted by other matters. During Charlemagne's campaign in Hispania, the Saxons advanced to Deutz on the Rhine and plundered along the river. They were decisively conquered by Charlemagne in a long series of annual campaigns. The Saxon Wars with defeat came in forced baptism and conversion, as well as the union of the Saxons with the rest of the Germanic, Frankish Empire. The sacred tree, a pillar, a symbol of Irminsul, was destroyed. Charlemagne also deported 10,000 of them to Neustria and gave the now vacant lands to the loyal king of the Abbatrites. Einhard, Charlemagne's biographer, says on the closing of this grand conflict, the war that had lasted so many years was at length ended by their acceding to the terms offered by the king, which were renunciation of their national religious customs and the worship of devils, acceptance of the sacraments of the Christian faith and religion, and union with the Franks to form one people. Under Carolingian rule, the Saxons were reduced to tributary status. There is evidence that the Saxons, as well as Slavic tributaries such as the Abbatrites and the Wends, often provided troops to the Carolingian overlords. The Dukes of Saxony became kings and later the first emperors of Germany during the 10th century, but they lost this position in 1024. The duchy was divided up in 1180 when Duke Henry the Lion, Emperor Otto's grandson, refused to follow his cousin Emperor Frederick Barbarossa into war in Lombardy. During the High Middle Ages, under the Salian emperors and, later, under the Teutonic Knights, German settlers moved east of the Saale into the area of a Western Slavic tribe, the Sorbs. The Sorbs were gradually Germanized. This region subsequently acquired the name Saxony through political circumstances, though it was initially called the March of Meissen. The rulers of Meissen acquired control of the Duchy of Saxony in 1423. They eventually applied the name Saxony to the whole of the kingdom. Since then, this part of eastern Germany has been referred to as Saxony, a source of some misunderstanding about the original homeland of the Saxons, with a central part in the present-day German state of Lower Saxony, Netherlands. In the Netherlands, Saxons occupied the territory south of the Frisians and north of the Franks. In the west it reached as far as the Gooi region, in the south as far as the Lower Rhine. After the conquest of Charlemagne, this area formed the main part of the bishopric of Utrecht. The Saxon Duchy of Hamaland played an important role in the formation of the Duchy of Gelders. The local language, although strongly influenced by Standard Dutch, is still officially recognized as Dutch Low Saxon. Italy and Provence. In 569, some Saxons accompanied the Lombards into Italy under the leadership of Alboin and settled there. In 572, they raided southeastern Gaul as far as Stablo, now Estoublon. Divided, they were easily defeated by the Gallo-Roman general Mummolus. When the Saxons regrouped, a peace treaty was negotiated whereby the Italian Saxons were allowed to settle with the families in Austrasia, gathering the families and belongings in Italy. They returned to Provence in two groups in 573. One group proceeded by way of Nice and another via Embrun, joining up at Avignon. They plundered the territory and were as a consequence stopped from crossing the Rhone by Mummolus. They were forced to pay compensation for what they had robbed before they could enter Austrasia. These people are known only by documents, and the settlement cannot be compared to the archaeological artifacts and remains that attest to Saxon settlements in northern and western Gaul. Gaul, a Saxon king named Edwasa, conquered Angers in 463, only to be dislodged by Childeric I and the Salian Franks, allies of the Roman Empire. It is possible that Saxon settlement of Great Britain began only in response to expanding Frankish control of the Channel coast. Some Saxons already lived along the Saxon shore of Gaul. They can be traced in documents but also in archaeology and in toponymy. The Notitia Dignitatum mentions the Tribunus Cohortis Primi Novae Armoricani, Granina, in Litor Saxonico. The location of Granina is uncertain and was identified by the historians and toponymists at different places, mainly with the town known today as Granville nearby. The Notitia Dignitatum does not explain where these Roman soldiers came from. Some toponymists have proposed Grains as the location for Granina, Graninum. It could be the same element *gran that is recognized in Guernsey. This location is closer to Bayeux, where Gregory of Tours evokes otherwise the Saxones Barjocassini, which were ineffective to defeat the Breton Warog II in 579. A Saxon unit of laity settled at Bayeux, the Saxones Biocassenses. These Saxons became subjects of Clovis I late in the 5th century. The Saxons of Bayeux comprised a standing army and were often called upon to serve alongside the local levy of the region in Merovingian military campaigns. They were ineffective against the Breton Warog in this capacity in 579. In 589, the Saxons wore the hair in the Breton fashion at the orders of Fredegund and fought with them as allies against Guntram. Beginning in 626, the Saxons of the Bessin were used by Dagobert I for his campaigns against the Basques. One of their own, Argina, was created a dux over the region of Vasconia. In 843 and 846 under King Charles the Bald, other official documents mention a pagus called Ottlinger Saxonia in the Bessin region, but the meaning of Ottlinger is unclear. Different Bessin toponyms were identified as typically Saxon, Excotten. It is the only place name in Normandy that can be interpreted as a ton one. In contrast to this one example, in Normandy are numerous tun villages in the north of France, in Boulonnais, Aix, Alinc-Tun, Villincathan, Pellington, etc., showing with other toponyms an important Saxon or Anglo-Saxon settlement. Comparing the concentration of hem toponyms in the Bessin and in the Boulonnais gives more examples of Saxon settlement. In the area known today as Normandy, the ham cases of Bessin are unique. They do not exist elsewhere. Other cases were considered, but there is no determining example. Canaan could be the biblical name Canaan or Aaron, the Germanic masculine name Heramis. The Bessin examples are clear. Wheatram, Etraim, Harpain, Saran, etc. Another significant example can be found in the Norman onomastics. The widespread surname Lessane, with variant spellings, Lessane, Lessine, Lesine and Sane. It comes from Gallo-Romance *saxinu, the Saxon, and gt, sen in Old French. These examples are not derived from more recent Anglo-Scandinavian toponyms, because in that case they would have been numerous in the Norman regions settled by the Nordic peoples. That is not the case, nor does Bessin belong to the Pagii, which were affected by an important wave of Anglo-Scandinavian immigration. In addition, archaeological finds add evidence to the documents and the results of toponymic research. All around the city of Caen and in the Bessin, excavations have shown numerous Anglo-Saxon jewelry, design elements, settings and weapons. All these things were discovered in cemeteries in a context of the 5th, 6th and 7th centuries AD. The oldest and most spectacular Saxon site found in France to date is Vron, in Picardy. There archaeologists excavated a large cemetery with tombs dating from the Roman Empire until the 6th century. Furniture and other grave goods, as well as the human remains, revealed a group of people buried in the 4th and 5th centuries AD. Physically different from the usual local inhabitants found before this period, they instead resembled the Germanic populations of the north. At the beginning 92% were buried, sometimes with typical Germanic weapons. Then, they were ranked to the east when they were buried in the 5th and later to the beginning of the 6th century. A strong Anglo-Saxon influence became obvious in the middle of the period, but it disappeared later. Archaeological material, neighboring toponymy, and texts support the same conclusions. Settlement of Saxon foederati with the families. Further anthropological research by Joel Blondero shows these people were from Low Saxony. Saxons in Britain. Saxons, along with Angles, Frisians and Jutes, invaded and migrated to the island of Great Britain around the time of the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Saxon raiders had been harassing the eastern and southern shores of Britannia for centuries before, prompting the construction of a string of coastal forts called the Littoria Saxonica, a Saxon shore. Before the end of Roman rule in Britannia, many Saxons and other folk had been permitted to settle in these areas as farmers. According to tradition, the Saxons first entered Britain en masse as part of an agreement to protect the Britons from the incursions of the Picts, Gaels and others. The story, as reported in such sources as the Historia Brittonum and Gildas, indicates that the British king Vortigern allowed the Germanic warlords, later named as Hengist and Horsa by Bede, to settle the people on the Isle of Thanet in exchange for the service as mercenaries. According to Bede, Hengist manipulated Vortigern into granting more land and allowing for more settlers to come in, paving the way for the Germanic settlement of Britain. Historians are divided about what followed. Some argue that the takeover of southern Great Britain by the Anglo-Saxons was peaceful. The known account from a native Briton who lived in the mid-5th century AD, Gildas, described events as a forced takeover by armed attack. The fire spread from sea to sea, fed by the hands of our foes in the east, and did not cease until, destroying the neighboring towns and lands, it reached the other side of the island, and dipped its red and savage tongue in the Western Ocean. In these assaults, all the columns were leveled with the ground by the frequent strokes of the battering ram. All the husbandmen rooted together with the bishops, priests and people, whilst the sword gleamed, and the flames crackled around them on every side. Lamentable to behold, in the midst of the streets lay the tops of lofty towers, tumbled to the ground, stones of high walls, holy altars, fragments of human bodies, covered with livid clots of coagulated blood, looking as if they had been squeezed together in a press, and with no chance of being buried, save in the ruins of the houses, or in the ravening bellies of wild beasts and birds. Was reverence be it spoken for the blessed souls, if, indeed, there were many found who were carried, at that time, into the high heaven by the holy angels. Some, therefore, of the miserable remnant, being taken in the mountains, were murdered in great numbers. Others, constrained by famine, came and yielded themselves to be slaves forever to the foes, running the risk of being instantly slain, which truly was the greatest favor that could be offered them. Some others passed beyond the seas with loud lamentations instead of the voice of exhortation. Others, committing the safeguard of the lives, which were in continual jeopardy, to the mountains, precipices, thickly wooded forests and to the rocks of the seas, remained still in the country. Gildas described how the Saxons were later slaughtered at the Battle of Mons Badonicus 44 years before he wrote his history, and Britain reverted to Romano-British rule. The 8th century English historian Bede disagreed with Gildas, stating that the Saxon invasions continued after the Battle of Mons Badonicus, including also Jutish and Anglic expeditions. He said these resulted in a swift overrunning of the entirety of southeastern Britain, and the foundation of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. 4 separate Saxon realms emerged. East Saxons created the Kingdom of Essex. Middle Saxons created the province of Middlesex. South Saxons, led by Il, created the Kingdom of Sussex. West Saxons created the Kingdom of Wessex. During the period of the reigns from Egbert to Alfred the Great, the kings of Wessex emerged as Bretwalda, unifying the country. They eventually organized it as the Kingdom of England in the face of Viking invasions.